Welcome to Smart Curriculum Application, Managing Staffing and Recruitment Strategies. Those of you that have been using the app will be familiar with the front screen. This is where we begin everything with the app at the dashboard. We are going to concentrate on the staffing element, which we'll come to in a moment, but we're going to begin with the data entry processes because one or two things have been upgraded and added to in the last upgrade. So at the data entry hub, we have the elements that you're going to be adding. If you've used the app, will have set up all your subjects and you'll have set up your years spans down here. We're going to just have a look at the staffing element. Now I'm going to start, now this is a sample school with data which won't be dissimilar to what you would be entering. But here we have our starting data set. So this is for a modelling phase. So a snapshot has been created and then copied over to the modelling phase. This is filtered to teachers. So we only have teachers on this model. On this one, we have teachers identified by a simple teacher code. And then moving across the screen, the compulsory elements, they're not on leave, they are active members of staff, they have an FTE, they've got an employment role, a status, a supplement and a contract. Now, what we found in the analysis is that we need a little bit more detail, and in terms of managing staff recruitment practices, we want a bit more detail. Now, so in the contract element, we have added the fact that you can now identify a member of staff as an agency member of staff. So you've got permanent, fixed term, agency and outsourced. Outsourced meaning that someone from another school maybe within a group of schools or a trust has been brought in to fulfill some activity because they're on someone else's budget as such. Now, we would make an assumption that most agency staff are used because they're filling in a particular role. So what we've done is added a column which will allow you to identify the vacancies or the posts that you are advertising. Now, we would make an assumption that this agency member of staff would want to be filled by a permanent member of staff at some point. We have a member of staff up here who's identified as a vacancy because they're going to move on. And then in this list, we've got others that are identified. So head of department, that was the one at the top there was a leader, assistant head teacher. Now, to add more clarity, what we've done is divided the responsibility role. So we've given you the position to actually describe that responsibility. So assistant head teacher for teaching and learning, a support teacher, a citizenship lead teacher. Now these roles, if you will, this is a contract list. These are all the contracted teachers that are required to deliver the curriculum. That goes back to our dashboard where we're measuring bought against planned, what curriculum we've planned and what staff we have bought or we are buying to enable the delivery of that curriculum. So a little bit more clarity here. Obviously there is space to write notes. So we've got some schools that are quite happy to identify, let's say, those agency members of staff, this one up here. So this is our maths teacher. That they would put in here which agency this person has come from. So we identify that, it goes yellow, we save it, and that identifies them. That hopefully is not a company that any of you are using, that's just a name that we use just to identify it. Now, so we also will need to make sure that we've identified the primary subject that a member of staff is employed to teach. If we want to get into the employment practices, technically they're not maths teachers, they're teachers, but they're a teacher of a primary subject of maths. This is still a teacher. That teacher is a teacher of English. So on the further side, we have the ability to have any member of staff teaching up to 4 subjects. We refer to these as their primary subject, the primary subject that they are employed to teach or is their specialism, and then subsidiary subjects being well, up to 4 subjects. If you're used to timetabling packages, there are this sort of process is fairly well established in the way that they operate. So this history teacher here has also the ability to teach some English. Now, on the way that this operates, when a member of staff is put in, so if I consider that history teacher number 20, so this teacher here is a full-time teacher, so their FTE is 1. That person is employed as a QTS and has a TLR. For that TLR, they are going to be given 4 teaching periods as management time. So they have 4 periods when they're not teaching full-time. Now the calculation, this is done automatically, which is why this is grayed out over here. It will calculate the maximum number of teaching periods that can be taught. So that will be in your cycle. So if this is a 50 period cycle, taking the 5 periods of PPA, 10%, the maximum can be 45, and then a further allocation for all members of staff is added, because the maximum in this school that teachers are teaching is 42. So it would be the 5 teach periods of PPA plus 3 discretionary periods that the school has decided is appropriate for its context. There is obviously a cost attached to that, and that's part of the analytical stuff that we do, but that is how this is calculated in this institution. Now, the 4 periods that are given for management time would automatically drop this, for this history teacher, to 38 periods. Now, if we go over here to the actual teaching, the history teacher has 38 teaching periods available to them, but we want them to teach 10 periods of English, so it will calculate the 38 minus the subsidiary subjects, and we could add another one here. Let's suggest that this person might be doing 5 periods of media. Well, if they're doing 5 periods of media, then the number of history teaching periods will drop. So we're managing the time that these people have to be allocated. Now we're going to concentrate on the teachers first. So if we go back, you'll be used to the way that this now analyzes this data, and it represents that data here on a chart. So I said a moment ago about the planned teaching periods and the bought teaching periods. So the planned is what's on your curriculum model. So here, the curriculum model that's decided, the amount of periods that are designated for each subject are calculated from your curriculum structure. But once we've got those, we want to compare with the number. So maths here is 348 teaching periods against 400 bought teaching periods. That means a surplus of 52 periods. Now our history teacher, we said, was going to teach them English and media. So English here is at 374, and the bought period, that's the planned periods, the bought periods are at 358, a 16 period deficit. If we just move over here and turn on this subsidiary subject, you'll notice that that's now increased. The subsidiary subjects, we've got 32 periods, which says there in that legend there, you can see 32 teaching periods of subsidiary subject gives us a 6 period surplus. That means we're drawing periods from other people across the curriculum spectrum, and in this case they've come from humanities. Now maybe that wasn't wise, because that's got a shortfall already, but it's just in the illustration. Now what we've done because obviously this gives you some overview, and you can see very quickly where you've got surpluses and deficits. What we need to have is the ability to ask the question a little more at a granular level. So if here we navigate now to the table, we've now got the same data represented in more clarity. So now we have the English and Humanities department, the two that we've just used that example. We've got our range of subjects which you've identified will be within your Humanities department or faculty, or however you describe it, and the English in that area. Now, if this is a primary setting, it may be that you set your management groups up to be in year groups, and this would be the subjects that you want to identify within the year group. So it might be that this is year 6 and year 5 and year 4. That may be how you've presented it. And the subjects might be your literacy and numeracy, and then your general delivery and your PE. Now, those subjects might well be identified against your year groups. But all it's saying logically is these are the periods that we've planned. These are the periods that we have bought, and here is our surplus and deficit. In terms of this organizational group, there is a surplus. This bought periods will include the subsidiary subjects. So now it takes, we don't have that ability to see it with and without. All we're now seeing is we've planned to buy 122 periods, and we've assigned them all to this subject. That leaves us with a deficit, and actually we need to move 48 of those periods over to computer science. So of these people, who is it that's going to be teaching that computer science? Now, if I want to get to that, and I've made that kind of decision, I would then move straight back to the table. Just takes a moment to load. So we're now back at the table, and then I would go through and I'd start looking at those subjects. Now in this case, I've highlighted them, I'm just going to put them in. These would be computer science, and I can see I've got 20 periods there that would be available for that. So if I now go back to my table, I've now moved, you saw there was 5 and 20, I've moved 20 periods across from here to here. So these people are now able to deliver. Now, you'll notice within this, we've also got these three columns at the end: vacancies, TLRs, and full-time equivalent staff. So the number of staff that I've got within each of these areas. Again, in the primary sector, it would be, if that's my reception, what's going on in reception. Quite often that's just general delivery, so general teaching. It depends on whether you wish to separate down literacy, numeracy, general teaching, and PE and music and specialist delivery. Some that are doing creative curriculum might just have a generic term, but that's what would appear here. So this might be your organizational frame is Key Stage 1 or reception or early years foundation stage, or however you're describing it. In the secondary sector, we tend to do it by groups of subjects, and here we've given the means of dividing it down. But here, so once we've got our organizational frame and we've identified that we've got a range of people here that are identified as vacancies, we want to be able to see who is on that vacancy list. So all of these people are identified here from the staffing table. So now we have the ability to show this is our appointment structure and recruitment targets for this next period. We've also put in the ability to print that. So Here it'll come out as a PDF and you can save or print or share with colleagues. So for this school, here is my vacancy list for this period, and it will date it. So obviously you've got things coming through and they'll change over time, particularly at this period of the year when there may or may not be a resignation cycle going on. But you'll notice from this list that we've got support and admin staff on the list too. It isn't just about teachers, it's about our whole staffing process. Now, the role and responsibility, apologies about the spelling mistake there, that needs to be sorted out today, so we'll get that down. The role and responsibility here has been identified. It must be identified within your staffing table to make sure that that shows up here and it identifies who it is you're appointing. Obviously within the contract, where we've got agencies, if the intention is to leave the agency for a fixed term, you'll need to make your decision about when that person is available, or at least when the intention is to advertise to replace that person. So this is simply controlled by, on the staffing table, the fact that you've identified a vacancy or not. And then the general intentions of what you have for these people, the main subjects that they're delivering. Obviously, if you're appointing a leader, which we've identified here, we've got an assistant head of teaching and learning, it may be that they don't come in as an English teacher. You may end up with the right person being in another specialism. Well, you simply go in and change this detail on the staffing table, and that will ripple through as live to all of the other elements. That's how we're saying then that you've got the means to manage your staffing and recruitment. I just want to go in and have a quick look at support and admin. We've started with teaching staff, but it's important that we just look at the other elements too. So I'm just going to come off there. Now, obviously the support and admin are not going to be represented on this because this is focused on our curriculum analysis. So we're just going to go back to our staffing table. And I'm going to come and look at support. So here we have a smaller number of members of staff. Very similar in structure to the other. We've got the fact that there's an FTE. Now within the support and admin staff, there is a significant difference in employment terms. Obviously teachers are employed what is considered to be for a whole year. They will be with you 52.14 weeks of the year. Support and admin staff are not contracted on the same terms. Many of you will know that, but we've had to represent that in a different way on the staffing sheet. So where these have been estimated in terms of their FTE, we are now making it possible that you can get this accurately created from two figures. The two figures will be the admin and support weeks per year, so the terms of their contract. Now all of these are on 38 weeks of the year contract, or what we would refer to as term time only, and there is a list of potential others, 38 weeks, 39, so that's term time only plus training days, 40 weeks, term time only plus training days plus 1 week of holiday, 2 weeks of holiday, 3 weeks in holiday, and well, generally these top two are not 4 weeks in holiday. They tend to be 1 week in the holiday plus an allowance for holiday pay. So these members of staff are identified with a week allowance, typically 38 and 39, but we've allowed for the most common of the others. You can type in another, so if they're on 45, then you would just type in 45. It will default to full-time, 52.14. So if 52.14 weeks, so that person, if they're on a 52.14 and they work the full number of hours in the week, then their FTE would calculate to 1. Now, as is the case in all education, there are complicated systems, and the the basis of the hours per week, what is full-time, is often different between admin and support within different areas of the country. And what is considered a base hours contract, many of you may be familiar with this, is different where you go. Now, you get very used to what one particular authority does, but what we've had to do is to build in the possibility of having different base hours. So I'm just going to quickly move out and go back to global parameters here. So in global parameters, we've added a staffing table, and on the staffing table, you are able to add the base hours for admin and the base hours for support. Now, we've put it in at 37.5 as default, but some schools run at 32, some run at 32.5, some run at 35, some run at 37, some run at 37.5, and some run at 42, and any variation within that spectrum. It's just an anomaly of the education profession and what's gone on across local authorities, but we needed to allow for that base hours. So you can change that. It defaults to 37, but it allows you to record an accurate FTE. So effectively, what we're saying is the full-time equivalent for admin and support members of staff will be calculated. You don't have to estimate it now, but it will be from the number of weeks that they do in the year, whatever their contract is, as a proportion of 52.14, and then the number of hours that they are employed within a week as a proportion of a full-time contract. And now that's why this is quite a complex number, because the actual sum is the hours per week divided by 52.14 multiplied by, sorry, the number of weeks per year divided by 52.14 multiplied by the number of hours per week that the member of staff works divided by their base hours for the school. And that product will get you an FTE. I'm just going to say here, the reason that we're going to this length is that these lengths is that a number of schools, and in fact everybody that uses the app, has been asking whether it's possible to calculate an accurate salary for each person based on the scales that we know exist. And you know, the NJC scales for support and admin staff, and the teacher scales that are published every year through the standard teacher pay and conditions document. Can we accurately say the value of each member of staff? Because obviously all the analysis that we do is based on your budget divided by the number of FTEs that you have in the school, which is broadly an average. And there will be some staff that are valued cost more, and there are some staff who cost less. So in terms of making structural changes, we want to see actual cost rather than projected cost based on an average. And all of these changes are moving to that goal. So that development is well underway, but we're having to do it in stages because you've got data in the system, and this is the next stage. But it allows you to be able to accurately suggest the full-time equivalents. So when we go back to, just before I go, again, same as before, we've got the different contract terms, including agency, not outsourced here. It's very unlikely for a support member of staff to be outsourced. We have the range, and we've added the ability to put in apprentices here, but for support, obviously, HLTAs and TAs. In terms of managing staff, there's a language around schools where everyone that's not a teacher is a support member of staff. We make the distinction because of budget between support being anyone that's involved in educational activity but not a teacher, so an HLTA or a TA, and everyone else at the moment is an administrative member of staff. Now, it could include librarians, that could include non-teaching heads of year, because they aren't necessarily involved in face-to-face learning activity, although they might contribute to that, but they would be administrative staff rather than support members of staff. Now, I know that may sound different from the language that you use, but it is quite an important distinction, because we are looking at, go back to the principles of the dashboard, we are measuring what you've planned in terms of education delivery against what you've bought to deliver that planned activity. And in the same way, the support hours, this is HLTA and TA hours, this planned activity comes from the provisions that you have determined that go on in your school. Now, these provisions will be all sorts of things. Now, in most schools, there will be a grey line between teachers that have spare time and perhaps get involved in some of this, or in a primary setting, you might have HLTAs that are prepared and trained to take over PPA cover. Now, in terms of the distinction in time, we don't ask for the time that's bought here to contribute to the time that's here. Basically, what we're saying is the 72.5 hours that we can see are the difference between these two. One might be described as surplus. Strategically, that is bought so that if in the primary setting, PPA is conducted by HLTAs, then that comes from that 72 hours. Quite often, if that's the case, you'll see in the primary setting that the bought hours here is actually less than the planned hours, but it's supplemented by the surplus that's here. Now, it's not right or wrong, it's a question of the way that we represent it. If we know that there's 72 hours short here, and we've got 72 hours surplus here, it's fairly straightforward to see that that is being used for this. Clearly, one of the implications of analysis is those 72 hours are cheaper than the teaching hours. So from a cost analysis, one would say that that is there's a difference there. It's not necessarily a benefit, because obviously the planned curriculum, the ideal is that that is taught by the most qualified people that we have, and the teachers will be those people that are highly qualified to plan and deliver. It's not to say that HLTAs are not qualified, they are not teachers. There is a significant difference. So the analysis that we've got here is all formed from the staffing data that you have entered into the system. So the place to go, we've gone into depth on what's happening here with our analysis, and the subsidiary subjects we can see we've shown there. We can now demonstrate the data at a granular level, and in this secondary sector we can see that we've shown the subjects, and in a primary sector we would do it quite differently. It may be that this is general teaching and we have the year groups down here, and then we separate out the subjects that are taught by other members of staff, maybe a specialist PE, maybe a specialist music teacher. That's not uncommon in terms of what we see. We've also provided then the means to have your vacancy list, and then you can print that list, which enables you to share that with HR, finance, leaders of the school. But obviously this data is only as good as what is entered on the data table. So this needs to be accurate. I stress that because we see, and we're supporting schools in making sure the data is as secure and up to date as it can be. We do see, well, I don't have to fill in that column. I don't want to fill in that column. Well, you see here, this one hasn't been entered, which means that data won't show through. So it's only as good as the data that's entered. Alex, can I demonstrate exporting teacher subject data? Okay, so if I just share my screen again. Okay, so if I was to bring back my teacher view, Now, again, a word of caution here, Alex. I will say you can't and won't be able to highlight columns. When you export the table as it is. So in terms of your view at the moment, it will include the contractual details of fixed term, permanent and position. There's no value on here. So at the moment this is all data which you would justifiably want to export. So how we do it, very simply, up in the top right hand corner it says more, it says export entries. Take it out. Now you can take it out in different forms. So if you're going to put it in a database, so if you wanted to take it to Access or something of that type, you could do, but we're simply just going to take it out to an Excel file. Now it will, as long as you can see the screen, I did share it as a screen, that's opening it in Excel. Excuse my machine for a moment. I'm not going to enable editing, but there it is in a simple Excel format, exactly everything you've got there. So here excuse me, here you can see what teacher they are, but now we've got the management time. Sorry, I'll just take that back to the top. So we've got the management time, we've got the subject, their primary subject, the allocation within that subject, the secondary subject, or the allocation, the tertiary subject and the allocation, and the quad subject and their allocation. Now we've also got their full-time equivalent, and in this one you'll note that the allocated periods is actually, for some reason, right over the right hand side here. It's just the way it defaults on the table, but there you can see the calculated allocated period. So that would be the number of periods that you would put into a timetable package, but it's as simple as that. Now while I'm here, it might be worth saying that we have people have been asking the question about, could you import that data? So if I was to change any of this, could you bring it back? Well, the way that live data set works is that it is simply cut and paste. So provided that that table, the table that you can see there, excuse me just one moment while I just, yeah, if you can see that table there, as long as the format of this table is exactly the same as that table, I can cut and paste any element of it and paste it over. So if I wanted to take a column, because perhaps I've decided that my secondary subject allocations are different, I could highlight all of those, copy that, and then paste that into my, as long as I did it at the top, I could paste that in there. So you have the ability to cut and paste between Excel sheets, because live data set is built as an online spreadsheet style. So, but that's simply how to do it. You have that information here. While I'm here, I'll also just say, if I view this cell, I can see the detail of teacher 2 here, but I can also see who's changed all of the detail. I was going to mention that earlier. So I can see that people have made alterations to this data. So as a staffing sheet, and if I'm at a management level and I want to see what's going on, I have a change log. You can see when this data has been changed, and I have the actual detail, and I can go back to the entries. Sorry, it just takes a moment here to load that, because there's quite a bit of data on this school. Firstly, we are putting developments out every fortnight, so you will see over time the data will update. Certainly the format of the screens will update roughly fortnightly. We put out an updates email regularly, and you'll be able to see the things that we're working on. I am keen to get your feedback in terms of how you're using the app, and the particular things that you would like to see added in terms of managing. Obviously it started as an analytical tool, and people are using it much more for management practice as well as the analytics. Much more, we're happy and used to this integrated curriculum finance planning and the ability to project forward. So there are a number of things that are coming through on that analytical side, but also concerned with, as I've shown you today, the management issues of handling your staff profile and looking at what's going on. Now, what I haven't done today is gone into the analytics specifically, but your ability to look at the quantity of leadership positions. What we are doing, and at the request of some of the head teachers, is looking at this actual cost rather than budget cost, because that is a key issue for where people are going. Those of you that are using it as the source for timetabling, obviously you've got the means to export data, top right hand corner, export to XLS files to be opened in Excel or Google Sheets or whatever. It does mean that if you're using packages like NovaT, you can take the staffing list, primary subjects, secondary subjects, you can then transfer that data. You won't be able to import it to NovaT or Scheduler. Scheduler, you've got a little bit more flexibility, but NovaT doesn't allow for that kind of import, but it does mean that you've got the staff in alphabetical order and you can transfer that data. You've got an allocation, you've got the subjects that they're primary teaching, you've got their employed hours and so on. If you are using it as a management tool to determine what's going on within departments, you've got now that granular table so that you can export that data. Now, in terms of user permissions, I will add that you can set or open it up if you wanted to get your middle leaders, your heads of departments, to see the data that's there. If you gave them read-only access, they wouldn't have access to the data tables, but they would be able to see their staffing profile. They're not named people, it is the number of periods that they have, and it gives them the chance to consider, well, who do I want teaching the subjects that we've not actually identified? So it will help you if you're managing this data. Obviously that's very secondary focused. If you're looking at primary, we might be looking at where HLTAs are going to be used to fulfill PPA cover, and how you're going to deploy those specialists that you're buying in, the outsourced people. So you might have your music specialist or your PE specialist or whatever else that you're using. So lastly, the comment I'm raised there, we are looking to develop a developers group, or at least a beginner developers group, and I'm interested if any of you would be interested in engaging with that. You know, I and my colleagues can sit here and we can develop the app, and you know, with the years of experience that I've got, I think I know where things are likely to be needed, and certainly what things are going on within the education world. But I'm not arrogant enough to think I've got all the answers. So if there are things that you believe that we could look at differently or would help you do what you're trying to do, we have some plans of developments on the financial sector. There's more on the finance that we wanted to show. There's more on the staffing that we want to show. There are more on pupil numbers. There's some tools that we're looking at to add. It again, I emphasize, it's an analytical tool and a management tool. It's not intended to be a timetable base, so it's not going to do your timetable for you at the moment. Maybe that's going to be down the line sometime, but just if there are things that you would like to get involved in the conversation of development, please do email us at info@cjlearning.com, and we'd love to engage you. And again, it will be an online experience. It would be a webinar developers group. We've got a couple of head teachers that are interested already, but if you'd like to contribute to that and get involved in the development, we'd be very interested to talk to you.